Hey guys, it's Barrett with the Gimpy Camper. Today, I'm down here at Shelburne RV. We're having a couple of different projects done. In this video, we're going to be talking mainly about slide toppers. I'm going to have them put some slide toppers on this thing. And so, why would you want slide toppers? Well, slide toppers are going to help protect your slide roofs from the elements. And so it's going to decrease the amount of water that you get in your camper, especially after it rains and you have to pull your slides in. It also helps protect against UV rays, so less UV rays beat down on the top of your slides. It's just a thing that you need to do, right? I've never had them before. It's always kind of been on my to-do list. But, you know, I've really wanted some. On top of the weather element protection, you also have protection from debris that are floating around. So especially in the fall when all the leaves are falling, all that kind of stuff. And so you're going to have this area that's a canopy over the top of your slide. So when you pull it in, basically it's going to wind up by itself. All of the leaves and stuff that are on top of that canopy are just going to roll off the edge and fall down. You might have one or two that kind of roll up in there, but for the most part, they should all fall down and give you less work to do whenever you're having to pack up and leave. As with everything, there is a delicate balance with the slide toppers. There are some cons, really only one that I've heard, and there's a lot of positives. So what can the con be? Well, actually there's two cons. So number one con is they're not cheap. This is a decently expensive upgrade for you. But number two, the only problem that I've heard people have after they have them installed usually is they can flap quite loudly in high winds. And so if you are staying in an area, if you live in a part of the country where there's high winds, then that might be an issue for you. There are some things that you can do to help protect against that. One thing that people do is they take a big beach ball and they put it underneath the slide toppers, and that way it forms a little bit of a tent. Just gives it like some support there in the middle. That way they don't have a chance to flap. So if you're going to make the choice to get some slide toppers, the first thing that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to figure out what type of slide toppers that you want. And this can be really overwhelming, even if you want to do this yourself and not have it done somewhere by a professional. The problem is you get online, you start searching slide toppers. Number one, you're going to have quite a few different brands. So you're going to have Solera, you're going to have Carefree of Colorado, you're going to have Dometic. You're going to have probably 3 to 5 different brands pop up, okay? On top of that, you're going to have 2 or 3 different levels of the slide toppers. And so, what's going to work? Truthfully, I've looked at this stuff before, and I've got so aggravated with it and so overwhelmed in making a decision that I just backed out of the whole thing. So recently we noticed that there was a little bit of water damage on the floor, in the main floor of the camper, around one of the slides. It's not inside the slide, it's on the main floor, and it was about the size of my hand on both sides of the slide. We think we got that figured out, and we got an extra piece of seal there in the corner that Steve said should help with that. So I'm always paranoid about water damage, even with all the stuff that we've done to this camper. So we put the new RV Armor roof on. We did the Seal Tech test. Nothing's 100% guaranteed except for that roof. But, you know, the problem is we still found a little bit of water damage in there. So because of that, I wanted to put the slide toppers on. I was really thinking this year I was probably going to do it before the fall, because that's always an issue anyway when we go camping in the fall. And so that's kind of where I'm at with this. So because I found a little bit of water damage around the slide, I said we'll put the slide topper on. That'll prevent water from getting mostly anywhere around the slide. And so that's going to help protect the camper in the long run. Now the first thing that you're going to have to do before you order a slide topper is you're going to have to measure your slide. You're going to have to figure out what size slide topper you want. It's real important in this process that you get one that's a little bit longer than your slide. Because think about it, if the edge of your slide's here and the roof's here, you're going to want that slide topper to come out over it a little bit, so that way it deflects water past the edge of the slide, so that way it just protects the whole slide. You don't have to worry about it as much. A lot of resources that I found wouldn't give an exact number. They say a minimum of 6 inches. I did run across that. A minimum of 6 inches longer than the slide. But the key is you just want it to be a little bit longer. So here in a minute, we're going to get started installing the slide toppers on this camper. And I'm going to kind of walk you through step-by-step process there. This isn't what would be considered a really hard project for you to do yourself. If you do it yourself, the number one thing is that you're going to want to seal up any rails or anything that you have to put on your camper very well, because you don't want any water damage to get in there. I've told you guys before, these walls are really thin. They're easy to not get a good grab on when you put a screw in there or something. And you really want to seal it up really well, because if you don't, you're going to have water damage in the sidewall of your camper, and it's just going to go downhill from there. You may get lucky whenever you're putting these things in, because a lot of new campers come on the edge of the slides. If you look at the very top, they'll already have a flat bracket there that's a mounting bracket for the slide toppers that on the edge of the slide. Okay, so if your slide's like this, it'll be on the top corners. So you might get lucky there, and it might already be done. Now, if it is, I would still put a little bit of sealant above that and around that bracket just to be on the safe side, because as we know, there were 4 leaks in this when we did the seal tech test, and you never know what's been sealed up appropriately and what hadn't. Now with your camper, you may, on top of also having the brackets that are on the slides, I don't have those, but you may have a gutter above your slide. And a lot of times if you've got the gutter above your slide, it'll already have the extrusion bar part in it where you can put the slide topper, and so you won't have to mount anything else, and everything will be ready and you'll be ready to go. All right guys, so as you can see, I got the slide toppers on, but we got rained out that day. It was just a big mess. So I'm going to just walk you through how Shelburne's installed them for me. And you know, for the most part, these things aren't too bad to install, but it's one of those things that I just felt better kind of leaving to the professionals. But I want to walk you through how they did it, and you can make your own mind up of whether you want to jump into this or you want to have somebody else do it. I would say that it's probably about moderate difficulty, and you know, a lot of the tasks themselves are pretty simple. You are going to have a little bit of help when it comes to sliding the awning fabric on. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'm just going to walk you through how we did it. So the first step is going to be installing the plates on the actual slide. You might be lucky, they might be already pre-installed on your camper, because Lippert's doing a lot of that lately. But if they're not, it's just a metal plate. You put a little bit of butyl tape behind it, and you put it right inside the trim on the slide right there. I want to show you a picture of that. Basically, this should pretty much ensure that it goes into the framing right there, and it's a strong, good connection. The next step is to ensure that you have a rail on the side of your camper, so like right up here, mounted to your camper to hold the top part of the awning. And so some campers come pre-installed with that. I'm going to tell you that I thought mine were, but they ended up not being pre-installed. It was just a gutter and not a fabric rail. So the biggest thing with this, if yours comes pre-installed, you want to make sure that it's up high enough. I've noticed on a lot of them that are pre-installed, they're not the minimum 3 inches that Lippert recommends from the top of the slide to that rail. And so for that reason, you may want to install it anyway, even though you already have one there. I will tell you that that kind of was the situation we ran into. Even though ours, we realized, only had the gutter and it didn't have the fabric rail. But once they started to pull that gutter down, we realized that it wasn't really high enough. So we actually left it in place underneath the fabric rail, because we didn't want a bunch of unprotected holes right there on the side of the camper. So in order to get that minimum 3 inches difference, you want to use some type of spacer there. So with the slide closed, you're going to put a spacer above the trim of the slide right there, so it's a full 3 inches. Some people cut wood spacers and use here. At Shelburne's, they actually use just 3-inch bolts and just taped them to the side of the camper right above there, and then set the awning rail on top of that, which I thought that was pretty neat and a good way to do it. I've watched a bunch of videos on how to install these, and that's the first time that I saw that, so I gotta give them credit for that one. Now when you put it on there, you do want to make sure you use butyl tape behind that, and you also want to go back over it and seal it with some M-Clear or something like that along the top edge. Another thing that I never saw done before that Shelburne's did for me is they installed that fabric rail upside down. So the screws are on the bottom and the fabric's on top. Now in theory, that should raise that angle of that slide topper about another inch, as well as not really cause you any problems as long as you seal above it with some M-Clear. So they did that for me. I did make sure that they did it because I wasn't around when they did it. So at least on the entertainment slide. But I knew those guys did quality work. So I did check it and it was done. Also, when you're mounting that top bracket, you want to make sure that it's centered over the slide. So that's going to make things a lot easier to line it up and everything. So you want to mark the center point above the slide, and then you want to mark the center point of the extrusion rail, and you want to line those two up and mount that right there 3 inches above the slide. Like I say, the biggest thing that you got to watch out for when you do that is that you have enough elevation on that from that back point in order to not have the slide topper be flat, because water's not going to run off of it if it's flat. I see a lot of them installed that way, and it just makes my heart cringe. The next thing that they did is they installed the brackets on the slide portion. You know, you'd already installed the plates and screwed them into the slide, but then there's a bracket that slides over the top of that. There is 2 different elevation settings for that. Obviously, to get that angle more, you're going to want to use the lower setting on that as long as you have the proper clearance available. After you get those on there, you slide them on there, you use a couple of set screws to tighten down on there, and that just holds that bracket in place and keeps it from moving side to side. At this point, they went ahead and got the octagon shaped bar that goes into that bracket, and they just set them in there loosely just to prepare for the next step. After they did that, they used some needle nose pliers up there on the extrusion rail just to open that side up a little bit so it acted kind of like a funnel, and it just shaped it gradually so you could pull that fabric through easier without it catching. Now, whenever you do that, it's easier if you have somebody obviously to help hold the back end of that, because you're going to have to be on one end pulling it across and holding it in that channel. I did realize that when they did that, it seemed to slide in really well, unlike the awning top that I'd replaced on my old camper before with an old worn out extrusion rail that was just a beast. But on these newer ones, they just went whoop right in there. And since they centered that rail over the center of the slide, all you had to do is make sure that there's equal portions of the rail on the side of the fabric on both sides. And that's going to mean that your fabric's directly in the center, and you really shouldn't have any problems lining it up at all. So you get that in there, and then they just went ahead and set it on the octagonal support and just kind of had it loosely sitting there. Once they had that part lined up, they put the screws in to hold the octagon bars down, and then they put the end caps in the end of the hexagonal piece and put a bolt in there to hold it all together. After they had all those tight, then they ran the slide out a little bit, make sure that there weren't any wrinkles or anything in the fabric. The directions actually say to run it all the way out, but they had measured everything out, so everything was precisely where it needed to be, and they only had to make some very minor adjustments in that. And the last step was going to be to add a screw in both ends of the fabric through the extrusion rail. You just put a self-tapping screw in there, and that keeps that fabric from being able to shift forward or backwards and keeps it in the exact right place. So all in all, I'm happy with the install process that they did for me. They did handle some things that I wouldn't have known to do, like the LCI portion of the bracket, which is what the roller tube actually connects to. It's supposed to be straight up and down. They didn't like the way that that was sitting, so right behind that octagon shaped area, they did add a little piece of metal for a shim in order to try to make that a little bit more straight. I actually had a hard time believing the tension that this thing has on the slide topper, because those octagon rails that stick out the side, it actually did bend those back a little bit. You can see like that much tension on there, and it really surprises me that it holds up, just especially up there being mounted in the Luan. But that's why they have a ton of screws and the butyl tape and all that stuff in there. And we'll just have to see how it lasts. Obviously, it's supposed to last a long time or they wouldn't manufacture them this way. But I really hesitate before I put anything in the loo on, and that's really the number one reason that I had the dealership put this on. If you're looking for somebody to help you with all your RV needs, I highly recommend Shelburne RV if you're in the Southeast Tennessee area. If you're not, do your homework, find you a good, reputable dealer that will help you with all your problems. And I highly recommend the mom and pop type places because I see the difference that they do versus the big, huge chain stores. And so just find you a good RV tech, even if it's a mobile tech, hold on to them. Don't let them go. They are the key to making these things last a long, long, long time, because it's obviously not the way that they build these things that keeps them lasting over the years. Thanks for watching the video. You know, feel free to subscribe and hang out longer, but we got to go. We got things to do. See y'all later.
Do not forget to hit that subscribe button.